Please welcome Jesse Doherty, Vice President, AWS Network Edge Services, and Kurt Kufield, Vice President, AWS Platforms.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Thanks for coming. My name is Jesse Doherty, as I was introduced. I'm the Vice President for Edge Services. Best way to think about that is we have regions, as you're all familiar with, and they have to connect out to the internet. And I own and am responsible for the infrastructure and software that is used to connect and deliver that data out. So if you think about our media streaming services, our content acceleration like CDN, CloudFront, and AGA, and also relevant to this talk is all of our defense systems, all of the software designed to make sure that AWS is safe from the wild world of the internet. So anti-DDoS, bot protection, and other types of security that run between the internet and our regions. I've been at AWS for 10 years, which is in AWS years, that's 70 years in the real world.
Pretty much, yeah.
So that's kind of what I'm responsible for. Kurt?
My name is Kurt Kufield. I am the VP of AWS Platform, which is completely non-explanatory. But the way that I like to describe it is I own all of the pieces that make it possible to run AWS. So I'll just go through those real quickly. So I own Commerce Platform. You can think about that as billing, although it's a lot more than that. It is metering, it's bill generation, it's pricing plans, it's payments, it's foreign exchange. It's basically everything except the books for AWS itself. I also own identity, and identity, the most common thing that you probably know is IAM, but it's also everything else related to identity and access management. So it's organizations, it's Cognito, it's tagging, it's the legacy identities like Managed Active Directory, and that service, basically every single API call to AWS goes through IAM. I also own the console platform, so not the individual consoles from the service teams, but the overall platform, so what we use to really try and drive some consistency across the platform. If you think about AWS 5, 6, 7 years ago, there was pretty disparate experiences, and we've really tried to bring that experience together and provide a much better experience for our customers. I also own infrastructure as code, so you can think about that as CloudFormation and the CDK. I know I forget something here somewhere. I own external security services, so think about that as things like GuardDuty, Inspector, Security Lake, which we announced earlier. This went GA last week. And then I own Automated Reasoning, which is, we say mathematically provable security, but really use mathematics to prove correctness of certain things. And this has been done for years, but we've really managed to kind of bring that more out into the mainstream and make it easier for people. And I'm certain I've forgotten something in there. Oh, I've been with Amazon 23 and a half years, and with AWS for 10.
So Kurt, as someone who predates AWS, has been around for a while, and we're here to talk about.
I remember sitting in the lobby when they were going to talk to Jeff about doing AWS.
That's a pretty cool. We'll get to the origin story maybe later, but
okay.
Be curious to hear your take on what does end-to-end security mean in AWS?
It's a good question, and one of the things that I really want to do, as kind of owning a lot of that today, is I see a future where really security is simplifying all of the disparate things that you see today and simplifying the complex and making it just easier for our customers to implement that. Too many leaders have traditionally viewed security as kind of cumbersome, like it's something you do at the end. It's this carbuncle that you kind of put on top. And it's complicated, by the global shortage of, security professionals and, by the threat landscape, which is changing pretty significantly. Plus there are data protection, privacy demands, that are coming up over time. So it's really getting a lot more complicated out there. And I really look at taking all those things together and using them to simplify security implementation. maybe a terrible analogy, but I'll use an analogy. That simplification, I want to use security as really an opportunity to move faster. Think about it like brakes on a car. Brakes on a car to slow a car down, right? Well, no. Brakes on a car are there so that you can actually go faster because it makes it safer. And the way that I think about my job as security is I want to take, and our team wants to take, and AWS wants to take, and make it easier for you so that you can move faster as a business.
Yeah, what's interesting about this too is when you think about security as an enabler.
Don't look at me as you're talking.
I'm not.
Okay.
I refuse to. we did actually practice that part. When you start to change your mental model from security being an enforcement wing to being something that can make you go faster, it does change the way you look at a lot of it. You start thinking of it as being a proactive part of your business and not a reactive part. And that's certainly how we've looked at it internally, is that security is part of the products we build, and actually often in our own design discussions, it's like the most important part, because it doesn't really much matter what feature you add if the system isn't really trustworthy and you don't want to put that kind of critical data in it, then it's not that useful. So we'll spend a lot of time making sure that it's secure right at the very beginning and automated out of the gate. So I think that's what I feel like when I hear you say all that. It's critical.
Can I just, I want to add a little bit onto that. Is that all right?
Yeah, of course.
So here's the way that we think about our priorities at AWS. The single most important thing we do is security. The second most important thing that we do is durability. Never lose anybody's data. The third most important thing is availability. And then features and service launches are everything else. And now, obviously, security, durability, availability, they're deeply interconnected, but that security is first. And that happens all the way through. So it's not like you have a security team that kind of comes in and tells you what security to implement. Every single developer, every single person at AWS is responsible for security every single day. And our security team is there to provide guidance and to basically help us move more quickly. In many companies, security is the department of no. And for us, the way we think about security is how do we enable our developers to move more quickly. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. So when I think about it from within our groups, how does it actually help us move more quickly? When we take the security process, like kind of reviewing what's being built and deciding how safe it is, the earlier we move that into the design process with the engineers and builders, the more creative we can be, the more degrees of freedom we have, and the more flexible we can be. So if you've got this, the term is often used shift left, but if you bring that into a robust, creative discussion with the builders and product groups at the very beginning, you'll find a few things that you can enable with security, and you'll very early identify some things that you should absolutely not do in order to create a secure platform.
Yeah.
And finding those at the beginning is critical, and doing it as a collaboration is critical. And one thing I was thinking earlier today, like an analogy is, in some software design systems, you remember like there's the sequence where the product manager comes up with an idea, hands it to the engineer who interprets it and builds it, who then takes it over. Maybe we get some feedback through an alpha, maybe not, and then you ship. And that sequencing can lose a lot of fidelity and creativity. There's not as much of that kind of iterating internally about how innovation supports new functionality and how new functionality can drive innovation. So if you think about it, that the shift now, of course, is to have product and engineering very closely connected and iterating. So now just shift your thinking and say, well, let's put security in there too, or security expertise. So that becomes exactly part of that same rich discussion. And I have seen many situations where we've taken a very hard line on the security stance for a product. We will only do this, and it would almost sound impossible, the thing we were going to do.
Yeah.
But it wasn't, because we thought about it at the beginning, and we could actually invent something that hadn't been done before that would enable significant value because it happened at the beginning. And that creates a lot of speed, because I bet you many of you here have had the experience where later in a project you discover something and it's a hard lesson, because the cost of undoing that and trying to figure out how to address could be as much as this project's going nowhere to months and months of rework. And so there you can see that as being a headwind to productivity and speed.
I actually have a great example, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Hopefully everyone here uses encryption on S3. And when we built encryption into S3, we rethought how we did everything. Because had we not done that, had it been something we just added on, it wouldn't have worked. It would have been too slow. It would have been extremely expensive. And the way that encryption is implemented in S3, it's literally invisible to our customers, certainly from a performance perspective. And just really enables that ability to do that. And the reason that that's possible is because you think about it as part of the design process. And today, with encryption, we do that for everything.
You could find equivalents in our network in the way we've designed the EC2 network to allow security to be built in right at the foundation. The same is true of almost all of our systems because it was brought in at the very beginning. And the nice thing about when you bring in like this early innovation with builders is you now have, like, security becomes more like teachers and a creative role as opposed to a restrictive role.
Yeah.
Because you'll see these really fun discussions where security professionals start to become really well versed in architectural possibilities. Like, hey, we could do this. I learned from this other project, and it becomes an enabler. And so your security folks are doing more strategic work, moving out of kind of an audit and control, though that's still very important, into a design and innovate mode. And I think that creates more long-term value for the business. When you start to have that creativity up front, because you'll start inventing things that I think, like S3's encryption, like our network technologies, they pay off over the very long term, because you were able to invent that. And a secure platform means you're going to be able to move into new markets more quickly. You're going to be able to take on new workloads more flexibly. All of those things become options that would have been expensive to do if you late-minded them. And then I think one more way it makes you fast. Sometimes if you think about the security aspects of a product too late, it creates a lot of toil and randomization for your team. Just lots of extra work they have to do. Like, think about a product that wasn't necessarily designed to be operated in the environment you're putting it in, and just how much extra work your builders and your technologists have to do.
It's a retrofit.
It's a retrofit, and as a result, you spend too much of your builder's time on stuff that isn't direct value, because you're not using it it's not fit for purpose in that sense. So if you think about it, like, fewer surprises at the end, security doing more strategic work, and less toil are all ways that thinking about this end-to-end can really help you move more quickly with security.
I just want to add on to that a little bit. Like, when you, actually I hate the term shift left, but when you shift left and you start doing a lot of that early, turns out a lot of the systems that I own are security related, just like yours are. And the security team is not this outside team that comes in. They're our partners. And we work with them on a day-to-day regular basis, even though, and I think this is the right thing to do, they report up through a different structure in order to have that accountability, but we really work together on a continuous basis.
Yeah, I was thinking about this toil concept too. Like, if you think about dealing with security situations in an organization, there's often a lot of, I call scrobbling, but finding logs, moving here, connecting things together, trying to figure out the relationship between things. And I was going to say, this feels like something GuardDuty has really been helping people with.
Yeah, it has. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I happen to own GuardDuty. So we've launched a bunch of stuff in GuardDuty to help with some of this, undifferentiated heavy lifting, the toil. We've launched GuardDuty protection for containers, so that it's easy for you to bring all of that information in from inside of your containers. We've launched GuardDuty protection for databases, so that we know and you know what's going on in those databases, and for your other serverless workloads, GuardDuty for Lambda, so that you can bring all of that data together. And with just a few clicks in the AWS Management Console, you can now achieve and activate GuardDuty across all of that estate, multiple accounts, multiple regions, and you do that in a very simple, secure by design infrastructure, the AWS cloud infrastructure, and mitigate those threats early and simply by just using GuardDuty to do the analysis, initiate the automated responses, initiate the automated finding of any issues that may come up. So GuardDuty is really one of those things that we're trying to use and that we're really focusing on in order to make that much simpler for our customers, so that you don't have to bring all those bits and pieces together and make it, do it in a very complex fashion. Let me provide you with an example. So Warner Brothers Discovery recently paired GuardDuty and Amazon Detective to help them really kind of simplify a lot of their anomaly detection and their agility. You know, before they did this, their security engineers would have to take logs from various systems. They'd have to take logs from AWS. They'd have to take logs from their cloud providers. They'd have to take logs from their services, and they have to put them on a SIM, and then they'd have to look and build systems to, you know, detect anomalous activity. It's tedious, right? It's just work, and it doesn't really allow them to innovate on the core value that they bring to the customers. But with GuardDuty, they were able to simplify a lot of that, and, you know, reduce some of the complex querying, and, you know, some of this massive disjoint data sets, and we could just work with them and do it for them.
That's cool. So one of the things
What would you like to? Anything else you want to talk about?
I'm going to talk about how we create the culture for this stuff.
Sure.
So once you're trying to figure out, okay, I like this end-to-end security idea that these guys are talking about, I want to be fast. There's always this question about, okay, so what do you do to enable it? And I can share with you that what I learned when I first joined AWS and what I've learned since is what has been really critical has been the creation of the culture that enables it.
Yeah.
And I remember like very early when I joined AWS, I'd heard before, you know, security is important. From many companies say that. But this is the first place I had seen where it was modeled daily by senior leadership. At the time, Andy Jassy, as our CEO, would personally get involved in auditing and getting deep into issues and making sure everyone understood them, and reinforcing on a regular basis that security is absolutely our top priority. And you'd not find very many people who would
talk about the weekly security meeting?
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
One of the things that we do is we basically review whether it's an operational issue, whether it's a security issue. We have a process that we use to drive continuous improvement. Security is one of those, and our most senior leaders get involved in that. One of the things that we do is the CEO of AWS has a weekly meeting where they review any security issues, any things that we may be driving. And this is not the meeting you want to get invited to. I have the dubious honor of being there every week. But what's really important about this is it sets the tone. Everybody cares. Everybody drives it. And it is about teaching, it's about understanding, and it's about that continuous improvement.
I think one thing that's important about this too, so I have a similar, smaller scale, slightly less scary meeting with my team, and we get together on a regular basis, on a weekly basis, and we get into very high levels of detail on the security programs we're operating, any security issues we need to work on. And the reason we get into the high level of detail is there's a couple of them. One of them is I'm an incredibly curious person and I can't help it. Second one is by having those rich discussions about the deep details, the technical and the ones related to software, hardware, my teams all understand that they have to know that stuff when they come. And for them to know that stuff, they had to have been deeply in it themselves, and their directs had to be deeply in it. And because by having those as a senior person, getting into the details like that, and paying attention to them, asking the tough questions, understanding them on a regular basis, it creates a machine whereby your whole org pays attention to it constantly. And if you let off the gas, it will get overrun by the other major priorities in the business, feature launches, whatever other pressures are coming into that business. And so staying closely connected and very into the details helps maintain it. And I think coupled with that, you can't always be about bad news. My own experience as well is it's also just as powerful to celebrate progress.
Yeah.
And celebrating progress in this is not just the big things. I find it's really powerful to celebrate an individual builder making a simple choice to improve that improved security, even in the smallest way. Yeah. Because they chose to raise that in a meeting, they chose to potentially change the way the product was going to evolve, or they spent some extra time working on it. Rewarding the small things reinforces the culture, I would say almost more than recognizing the big things.
Yeah.
I think the big things feel a little bit performative sometimes, like, hey, way to go on that launch. And also what happens is you encourage people to bring those ideas up in the meetings that may be disruptive, but may be critical, because they know that they're respected and required by leaders. So I think that part of creating a culture and the leadership dedication to it is absolutely critical to giving the team members permission to prioritize this work and stand up for it in all the meetings you can't be in.
Yep.
Which is where a lot of these decisions get made.
Yep. It's interesting that you bring that up, because my team runs the same way. I run weekly security meetings for my various teams, and the same sort of thing. And we go very, very deep into those. For some of them, I have where I can't participate. I have leaders that, are at my level, and they participate there too. And it's not just the when something happens, but when the good things happen, and celebrate those. It's really interesting. When you've got security integrated end to end, like, it's a great optimization of time and resources. And when you think about it early, you end up in a different place. Since we're using car examples, I'll provide you with a car example. I love to use this example. So there are 2 car manufacturers whose names I will not use, but I'm certain you are familiar with. And one car manufacturer starts off as building a luxury car and adds performance. The other car manufacturer starts off as building a performance car and add luxury. They're both great cars, but they end up in very different places. And the point there is, if you start with security at the beginning and then you build, you will end up in a different place. You'll be more secure. Now, one of the things that we really worry about at AWS is, how do we give our customers more bang for the buck? How can we build services together? How do we make that easier for our customers? And one of the things that you get, I think, out of the cloud, which is different than what you got on-prem, is that you get improvements on a continuous basis, right? So whether you're using GuardDuty today or IAM today, tomorrow it'll be different. The day after that, it will be different. And we're continuously improving. We're continuously changing. And you get that for free, because we just do that. It's part of what we do. So you're continuously improving the infrastructure that you're running on. You're not buying a fixed set of capabilities and then having to upgrade to the V next of the security, or V next of that. You're just getting it as part of the services. It's the continuous investment and improvement in technologies that you just get out of the cloud.
Before you get on with that,
Sure.
In my space, we have in the internet safety and security space, we have very active adversaries, right? If you think about it,
Really?
you've got people.
Never noticed.
You've got people who are basically run these services like their own little businesses and try and find ways to disrupt your businesses in general.
Yeah.
And so, as an infrastructure,
Let me interrupt you there, actually. I'm trying to remember the name of the company, but they literally run them as a company.
They do, yeah.
They have HR departments. They have
Yeah.
employee of the month. These adversarial businesses are run as a company.
Secretly, I prefer it when they do it that way, because they're easier to find and shut down. But when you think about choosing an infrastructure provider for security, you want one that has it built in. You want one that has obsession with security, like we've talked about, and you want one that's going to constantly evolve. But sometimes that rate of evolution has to be very fast. Like in the situation where you've got an adversary, we have in my group, we have these dedicated researchers across the globe who are able to look at, and this is kind of cool. So we have like a global backbone, connects to basically everything. Spans the Earth, connects to almost every ASN on the planet, and we're able to gather incredibly interesting telemetry about what traffic looks like in various situations. When there's a soccer game, a football game in certain European cities, their network looks amazing. It's all sorts of cool stuff happening. The same thing is true of when there's news events or when there's other legitimate events. We can tell and we can see the difference between that and malicious activity. And we can learn from such a broad estate and be able to bring that in, apply machine learning to that, apply our judgment from our security researchers, and develop security practices that prevent attacks before customers see them, before any of you see them. That's another example where by betting on a piece of infrastructure, a cloud infrastructure, and moving that security practice down, you get the benefit of this constant evolution, but at a very fast pace. so that you don't have to, which is really kind of the key. Because if you want to spend your resources on building your businesses, not building up your own defenses against, you don't want to end up in a invention battle with these motivated adversaries.
Yep. It's great call-outs. I'll give them an example of one of the ways that we're continuing to innovate. So I own AWS Private Certificate Authority, and I'm happy to pre-announce today the availability of AWS Private CA connector for Active Directory. And enterprises that use Active Directory and use AD to manage their Windows environments need this in order to basically do PKI with their environments. With AWS AD connector for Private CA, you can replace all of this expensive Microsoft Private CA infrastructure with a secure, easy to use, and available service that we manage directly. It's another one of those places where we just want to make it easier and remove that undifferentiated heavy lifting for our customers. I'll give you another example. We recently launched AWS, hold it, did you want to interrupt me?
No, I was about to cough. Sorry, go ahead.
No problem. We recently launched AWS payment cryptography. So if you are in the payments industry, that is, you have to process payments, you probably are familiar with the fact that you need to run payments HSMs. You need to create a constellation of payments HSMs. You need to put them in data centers. You need to hire people who can manage these, and they're pretty fragile. And it's just stuff that you need to manage in order for you to really do your core business, which is processing those payments or doing other parts of that. But with the launch of AWS Payment Cryptography, I always try to say payments, but payment cryptography, you can secure your data, and you can do that without having to run any of these payments HSMs. It's a service that helps you reduce your operational burden, and it uses a fully managed service to meet all of your payments and PCI requirements. So we've just launched that. Another example where you kind of get things in the cloud as they come through. Do you want to talk about Zero Trust, or should I talk about Zero Trust?
Why don't you kick us off?
All right. One of the big buzz phrases out there these days is Zero Trust. I actually don't like that phrase, but I think it's a good phrase to maybe just say, how do you make sure that on a continuous basis you are checking every API call, every time you access something, every time that you want to do something, reevaluating and checking to ensure that the request is coming from a trusted source. Used to be, remember the eggshell, the squishy egg,
yeah.
right? Hard outside, soft and gooey inside. We want to make sure that everything is hard all the way through. I'll give you just an example. Amazon as a company has been working on this for quite a while, and the laptops that we carry these days, as an example, we don't connect to a corporate network. We evaluate our access to all of our applications, to everything we do on a continuous basis. So we do analysis of, are you running on a supported platform? Are you up to date? Are you connecting from a trusted network or an untrusted network? And we may treat you differently. So Zero Trust also comes up a lot with our customers today, because a lot of customers want to go to this environment where you effectively never trust anything, and you have to keep doing that on a continuous basis. And we deeply believe in the outcomes and benefits that this model delivers for us. So you can apply Zero Trust concepts, rethinking identity, authentication, authorization, and do that in meaningful ways in order to improve your security. The next chapter for us in this is to comprehensively address those cases for our customers without the need to stitch together those multiple services. For example, every time developers build an app, they have to create permissions for application resources, and we believe we can simplify this. We can reduce the toil that's involved, and AWS can help you establish common ground when you build these applications. I've gone blank on the name of the service that we just launched, the language that we just launched.
Cedar.
Thank you. Actually, I hadn't gone blank. I just wanted to give him something to talk about. So in late last year, we launched Cedar. Cedar is an open source system that allows you to define access management in your applications. So not as you access AWS, but how do you build access management into your applications themselves? And what's interesting here is that nobody's really addressed this problem before. And when you've built applications, you've had to figure all this out yourself. So with Cedar, you can define the access management for your applications, and we once again remove that undifferentiated heavy lifting. And with then once you need to evaluate it, we launched Amazon Verified Access, where you can use that service to actually evaluate those Cedar policies every time that you need to get at something.
Yeah, you think about it, we've kind of covered, we think about zero trust. I'm a network guy, so I think about zero trust as being considering a lot of the things you talked about, but also network conditions. And so if you think about the mix of things we've launched Verified Access, so kind of like remote access for a desktop. We've launched VPC Lattice, which allows you to do constant reanalysis of the access or the flows between your VPCs and data in a very simple way. And then verified permissions, so that when you build an app, you can build all this in yourself so that you can control the permissions between tiers in your own application and make sure that that zero trust is carried all the way through. So if you use all these together, you can get kind of an end-to-end zero trust story.
The thing I like about both Cedar and the verified permissions is not only have we made it easier for customers, but we've used automated reasoning to prove correctness in those spaces.
Yeah, it's a pretty cool characteristic of Cedar that it can be done that way.
Yeah.
I think that's worth paying attention to. One of the hard things to do in security, of course, it's easy to say, let's stop Kurt from accessing this. It's very hard to say who can access this. And I think those sorts of problems are going to be critical and part of the powers of Cedar. Yeah. So like one thing about Cedar that's interesting too is it's open source.
Yes.
So this is an important part of our zero trust story here, which is it needs to be adopted broadly and it needs to engage with the community. Mm-hmm. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts, Kurt, on end-to-end security, Cedar, and just the partner landscape that we work with.
Absolutely, and we've worked with partners on this, not only partners helping our customers, but partners helping us to define the language. And by using security technologies and consulting services with these partners, they're with us in the trenches as we innovate for our customers. So these customers help us, and these partners help us to really be successful. I'll give you another example. Just 2 weeks ago, we launched we went GA, for Security Lake, for Amazon Security Lake, and which automatically centralizes your organization's security data. And when we built this, and we built OCSF, the language, the protocol for how you get everything into Security Lake, we built this with over 35 of the biggest providers of security out there, CrowdStrike, Datadog, and others that were really with us on this journey, so that you can bring all of that data together within your AWS account, your on-prem data, and then do analysis on top of that, regardless of where the data comes from. You can use also, turns out some companies are better at some things than others, and thus you can use your preferred provider for your security and your analytics, and do so with a centralized data lake, so that you don't have to build all of this yourself. We worked with partners to build all of this. And our customers put all of this into action. And when I think about how they should start with not just bringing all of that data together, but how should we think about that end-to-end security for our partners and for our customers?
True. Well, So far we talked about what end-to-end security is. We talked about some cool innovation to make it possible. So now I think we should probably talk about how do you actually start and get there.
Yep.
Which is kind of my favorite part. So I talked earlier about step one being the mindset, right? The cultural transition. How does leadership apply themselves to start making the change? Moving to a partner as opposed to the police model. And it's easy to say. It's an enormous amount of work, and it requires a lot of commitment from a leadership team to put in the time to maintain that. So it sounds simple. It's not at all. It might even be the hardest part of this discussion. Once you're in that mode, you look at what you're building, and you need to think about which of the parts of my security practice really should be part of my platform and not part of my general application and business. Which parts do I want to delegate to a platform provider, and which ones do I want to own? And the answers will be different when you ask that question for this year and for the long term. Right? So if you look at them over 2 time horizons and start to say, look, I really want over time to be betting on this security being deeper in the infrastructure that I build on, so I have to build less of it myself. And again, that sounds really simple, but it will drive a lot of interesting debates internally as to what the true business is and where to invest. But I think it's a critical step. And this is where I think it's really important to think about when you're looking at an infrastructure provider partner, you're looking for a place where that security is going to be constantly pulled down. You want to make sure that you're aligning with a provider that is their mojo. That's what they do. For us, for example, as we mentioned earlier, we build it into everything we do at the very beginning. And that's made the infrastructure suitable for financial companies, government agencies, healthcare agencies, because we thought about S3 encryption and network protection at the very beginning. Now, these heavily regulated and heavily security conscious companies can move on. And because we keep doing that, it makes it kind of easy to bet on our infrastructure as the place security will continue to grow. So one thing, I'll give you an example of this, one of my favorite ones, because it was something that we really didn't have to do, and that's Nitro. I'm sure many of you are familiar with Nitro here. Nitro, if you're not, is a hardware device that we built for our hypervisor. The hypervisor is the thing that switches between virtual machines, make sure that it does scheduling of CPU and memory access so that you can virtualize hosts. And one of the things that we decided early on is it is unacceptable for anyone in AWS to have administrative access to the virtual machine.
It's interesting. I was in those discussions early on, and there was a lot of back and forth about it, but in the end, the right thing to do was to ensure that nobody could get access to Nitro when it was running.
And so what's fascinating about that is you've got a company debating about spending resources and inventing something that will reduce their own ability to access and manage something, knowing it's the right thing to do.
Yep.
And that has paid off very well, because now we have all the systems we need around that to manage and make sure things are operationally strong. But at the same time, we can easily say to you, look, we've provably made it such that these are yours. These are not something that we can access.
It's also interesting because one of the things that I talk to customers about and the customers worry about is, well, what happens, because let's face it, software is complicated. What happens if somebody owns the hypervisor? Well, with AWS Nitro, that's not even possible because there is no hypervisor. The hypervisor literally is in a separate system that is unaccessible from the system, from the systems where the virtual machines are running.
Yeah, so I think if you look at the steps to take, there's this identifying the things that you want to move down into your infrastructure, and then there's operationalizing what you're doing, right? There's this idea that you now need to figure out how to build the processes and mechanisms around what you're doing such that you're keeping security early in the design system and that you're making sure that you're betting on the infrastructure. Because as you all know, a decision made once has effect once, but if you build an ongoing mechanism, you can ensure that drives the change you're looking for.
Yeah. If I can share an example.
Sure.
So there's a company that we work with, Uncork, and it's a great example of how the organizations really embrace this security is a partnership with development example, and shifting that security earlier into the development process. Their security teams over the years used to be point and click security operations, really to building security in as part of their code. They've operationalized the way security interacts with their developers and engineers, making sure that they build that security into that development process early, just like we have done over the years. And everything from pre-commit to pre-commit hooks, pre-vetting, pre-approving design patterns, and working with them early on. They're even helping developer teams and development teams kind of level up their own skills, level up their own security to be able to threat model their own applications. And this is really something that I would certainly strongly encourage. It's every developer's job to build security and to be secure all the time. So I love that example.
It's important, and I love seeing customers pick it up and start to get the speed benefits of it as well. It's part of the things that makes my job really, really rewarding. Once you've gone through the first steps I mentioned, you're moving things down, moving things early, and then of course you need to step back and say, well, am I reasonably covering all of the levels of security and compliance that I need to cover as part of this program? And so having a programmatic way to measure your progress against this is a key part of it. And here, there's usually a framework that will be adopted, something like NIST or the AWS Well-Architected Framework, that you can, if you're using a consistent infrastructure for your security, it makes it much simpler to measure against that. And you can use something like Security Hub to go and say, oh, let me look at my applications, my true infrastructure, and give me a sense of where I stand against these on an ongoing basis. And now, what's interesting here is you select your frameworks, you start to understand where you're at, you can use that to drive your practices over time and ensure that you're staying current. And of course, as you mature in this, you could develop your own frameworks and decide, oh, I would like to focus more on this and this. And I think that framework approach, plus getting help from partners who have expertise in this area, is an important part of making sure that as you're shifting, you are getting really good coverage across the security landscape and what you're attempting to do.
Yeah, I mean, I'll give you an example. So we have more than 300 services and features, I think, related to security at AWS, and this can be a little overwhelming. But you're talking about frameworks. Like one of the things that you can do is you can use something like Control Tower to kind of set up your landing zones and kind of set up that baseline for you, so that you know that within this framework you've met the well-architected design suggestions that we have. And then not only, and you mentioned this already, but not only do you have them set up, but do they continue to be set up the right way? You can use config to check that. You can use AWS Systems Manager to manage that. And we have predefined a lot of those controls, a lot of the standards that are out there in order to help you meet PCI or HIPAA or things like that. And you can just do that kind of right out of the box without you having to do all that work.
It's critical to automate all of these things. I think automation is a really important part of this. Automating your audit, automating the testing of your security infrastructure is all very key. And I think because, again, you don't want to be dedicating fixed time to that, fixed resources to that. The one thing I would say, too, is once you kind of get into this idea of you've got your framework, you've moved your engineering to the right places, you really need to start thinking about, okay, well, how am I going to scale this? I have, in our case, very many hundreds of teams, but you could say, I've got
more than 850 the last time I checked.
So you've got, you're starting to scale this out. You're growing your businesses and you're investing in new things and learning how to make sure that each one is building on this philosophy, I suppose, this set of mechanisms that you've created. And I think this is really important, is to do intentionally, is to say, okay, now I really want to make sure that I'm planning on how to scale this so that my teams can pick it up and move quickly. And so it's something that requires programmatic focus from leadership. And in here, you need to bet on something that's going to provide you immutable infrastructure. You want to be able to provide people with really nice places to start. So you use landing zones and Control Tower to set up the account infrastructure, use organizations to set policies. But then you use something like CloudFormation, some of these things to start setting what are the ways that a client-facing mobile app looks in our world. What is the shape and size and the configuration of that? And when you're designing that in an intentional way, you can also use things like serverless, something to extend and automate that so the automation goes with it, so that the people who are writing the applications don't have to go and design that. They simply take this off the shelf, they put in their logic, their bits, and they're already taking advantage of all the other standardization and the other work that you've done. And then they're able to deploy this safely in your infrastructure. And then you can iterate on that over time, you can grow it, but then you don't have to worry about the quality of this end-to-end security program you're running degrading as you grow. because I think that's a really important part of this practice, is paying attention to it. And I'll go back, because I've only been there for 10 years, so I'm a junior compared to Kurt here. But when I started, I remember going to one of our regular audit meetings. And this is, at the time, the meeting was small enough. This is our ops meeting at the time.
Yep.
You all go into this one big room, and I remember being just awestruck because we had 13 AWS services. 13. I was like, there's absolutely no way we're going to be able to scale beyond this. It's just too much at 13. I think we have, in terms of actual services now, I believe we're well over 300 now. We've got.
Yeah, I know the last number I saw was over 285, so it could be over 300.
But that scaling from 13 to 285 is exactly based on what we've been talking about, and it has been an intentional set of efforts by leadership to create that scale environment without increasing risk. And as I've been through it, and I'll admit a few times I was like, we're not going to make it to the next level is going to be too much scale, too much pressure. And the truth is, with a lot of leadership dedication, a set of systems like this, it does create very, very few barriers to continuing to scale while maintaining your security rigor.
Yep, totally agree.
Which I would say is probably going to be very difficult if you stick with a traditional police or kind of a post facto audit model.
It doesn't scale at all. In fact, the bigger you get, the slower you go.
And I think, you end up having to you end up trying to solve the problem with more hiring. You end up with increasing risk when you increase your velocity. Like, these things start to work against you.
And as the world changes, and the world's changing very quickly right now, that type of an approach doesn't really keep up, does it?
No. I mean, the world changes so quickly. Like, think about just where technology is today versus where technology was even 6 months ago. As a business trying to govern your infrastructure and technology, you have new things to think about and to innovate on a regular basis.
What are you thinking about here?
Well, it's funny you should mention that, Kurt. Personally, I think about things like generative AI and how it will put pressure on and change the way we think about data governance and being smart about how to put the right boundaries around it. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, it's interesting. So let me actually spin it the other way first. We're already seeing generative AI being used in attacks. And so not only is it going to be interesting in how we can use it for security, but it's, turns out some of those folks out there are very smart, and they're using it the exact opposite to help them really try and take down some of the security barriers we have today. But I think here there are several areas. One that we're going to use generative AI with is, I think we can use it to help actually make implementation of security easier. And that's an area that we're looking at. Also, I think the other area, and this is an area that a lot of companies, this is kind of where a lot of companies are right now, is they're thinking, all right, I've got these models, now I've got my own data, how do I use my own data to help, kind of train some of this, but I don't want my data to leak out. And, we have some systems that we've recently announced, like Amazon Bedrock, so that customers can start using generative AI and use it in a safe way, and use it such that they are able to improve the models but still keep their own data for themselves. It's a multi-layered approach. It has bar-raising security controls around it, and you get all of the standard AWS controls as well. Plus, you get config and CloudTrail to make sure that you continue to be protected as you're doing this. Also, as you continue to scale and as you grow your business, what can I use generative AI or what can I use other systems for in order to help with this?
I think this is the point of the talk where I admit that I jumped into part of this a bit early. I think what would be interesting, Kurt, actually, is let's talk about the scale part.
Okay.
I think you had a great example around who's been effective at actually scaling.
You mean like BotPrize?
Yeah.
Okay. So there's a company that we work with, BotPrize. Great example of scale. They're a startup in cloud security and automation industry. They have aggressive growth goals. They were challenged with scaling effectively because they needed to meet stringent requirements for their own security operations and automation. And what they did is in 2022, they went through the AWS well-architected review process, where they learned, kind of how to measure, how to build architectural best practices, and do that security early. They review the provided guidance and how they could work, with some of those security gaps. And by building their automation solutions on the AWS infrastructure using AWS security solutions like, Security Hub, GuardDuty, Inspector, they were able to move more quickly. Botprize built their security solution in 1 year when their usual time to market was double that. So it's really helped them accelerate. They continue to increase their customer base, and now the company can scale in a cost-effective way as they're continuing to scale just by scaling AWS.
Yeah, I think that's really the key takeaway here. I mean, one of the things I've tried to highlight
Peter?
today. What's that?
Did you just call me Peter?
No, I didn't. I said that's one of the great takeaways from today, Peter.
Okay.
Is there's a series of technological changes, the products you need to consume, and there's a set of cultural and leadership techniques that are necessary to make this happen. It's not a simple use this product, this will happen. It's not a simple use this leadership approach, this will happen. You have to think of it holistically to get end-to-end security to work. You have to think of a cloud platform that has this built into its DNA that you can bet on growing with your business. Mm-hmm. And then you need to think about how you're going to get your teams and practices to start bringing security earlier, and then scale those practices out as you grow. Make sure your cloud can do it with you. And I think all of that adds up to this last story, which I don't want to undersell here, which is this will all make you faster. And I think in the end, this is really one of the keys here, is being able to innovate and adapt to new challenges, deliver more for customers, and do so through the practice of security, as opposed to in spite of the practice of security. And I think it's really important. If you're left with one thought after this whole discussion, it would be that. It would be that if I tweak the way I approach security and I think about it as a creative part of my building process on a strong infrastructure, I think what you'll find is that you'll be able to deliver much more quickly and with much more security, and I think it'll be much better for your business and your builders.
Agreed.
Yes, your builders will love it
Agreed.
in the end. So great example, great story.
Thanks.
Love it.
I hope we've been able to, we're getting towards the end. I hope we've been able to provide some inspiration today on, how everybody can take, some time and build your own security culture, build the guardrails that you need to, and then keep the innovation flowing and be able to actually move more quickly.